It started with a phone call on a golden May morning in Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré was seated in his modest office, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, flipping through the latest reports on Burkina Faso's education reforms. 3 years of effort, countless late nights, real progress. His phone buzzed. 'Twas Dr. Alain Ouedraogo, his trusted international advisor. "Mr. President," Ouedraogo said, voice steady but excited. "The White House just sent an invitation. They want you to join a live forum on global education. Karoline Leavitt will be there too." Ibrahim set the papers down slowly. Karoline Leavitt, young, sharp-tongued, and fiercely combative. A rising political star in Washington, infamous for mocking foreign leaders in press briefings. "What's the format?" Ibrahim asked calmly. CNN? Live broadcast? Global audience. The theme, transforming education in the 21st century. They want to contrast the African and American approaches. There was a long pause. Then Ibrahim leaned back and smiled, not with arrogance, but with resolve. "Let's do it," he said. "It's time the world sees what Africa has to offer." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Karoline Leavitt stood by her window in the West Wing, flipping through her briefing binder like it was a tabloid Burkina Faso. She scoffed. "And this boy president thinks he can teach us about education." Her staff shifted uncomfortably. Emily Rodriguez, her young but sharp assistant, held up a printout. "Karoline, you might want to look at this. Their literacy rate has tripled in 3 years. School infrastructure's booming. They're even rolling out digital learning faster than we are in some states." Karoline didn't look impressed. "Emily," she said dryly, "that's PR fluff. These guys pad the numbers. My job isn't to praise fairy tales. It's to bring people back to reality." She slammed the binder shut. "Get me every flaw you can find. I want to expose him, not applaud him." Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré wasn't interested in showmanship. He called an emergency meeting with Minister of Education Aminata Kamper. "Let's verify everything," he said. "No exaggerations, no slogans, just truth, backed by names, faces, and real stories." Kamper came prepared. Literacy's up from 29% to 78%. "We've built nearly 250 schools. Digital access now covers most institutions. We've opened 23 new technical universities." Ibrahim nodded, impressed but not satisfied. "Data is good," he said, "but numbers alone won't move the world. Find me students, teachers, villagers, real lives changed." That's the story we need to tell. Karoline, on the other hand, was hunting for weaknesses. In a room full of researchers and analysts, she leaned in and said coldly, "I want every slip-up, lack of electricity, outdated materials, poor teacher training. Anything that makes this African president look like a fraud." Michael Thompson, her lead strategist, hesitated. "Karoline, it's been endorsed by UNESCO. Even Harvard's reviewing his education model. Going after him blindly could backfire." Karoline gave a smug smile. "I've dismantled senators twice his age. He's just a passionate populist in military fatigues. Trust me, I've got this." At CNN headquarters in Atlanta, Anderson Cooper was pacing. "I don't want soft talk," he told his producers. "This isn't about diplomacy. We're putting two philosophies head to head. Let's light the match." Cameras were being tested, stage lighting tuned, staff rehearsing cues. This wasn't just a panel. This was shaping up to be a showdown. Africa versus America, reform versus reputation, truth versus perception. By the evening of May 22nd, the stage was set. From a small studio in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré adjusted his earpiece. His desk, surrounded by notes, personal letters from students, and a weathered copy of Thomas Sankara's speeches, crossed the Atlantic in a sleek Washington. Studio Karoline Leavitt smoothed her blazer and checked her lipstick in the monitor. She was ready for a takedown. It was ready for something else entirely. Neither of them knew what the night would bring, but the world was watching. And this time, it wouldn't be Africa that needed to prove itself. It would be the truth. It was supposed to be an easy win. A seasoned American press secretary against a young African president from a small, landlocked country. But what unfolded live on CNN would stun the world. "Good evening, everyone," said Anderson Cooper, turning to the camera. "Tonight, we bring you a unique and timely conversation on the future of education, featuring President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso and U.S. Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt." The screen split. On one side, Ibrahim Traoré, seated in his presidential office, books behind him, the Burkina Faso flag waving quietly in the background. On the other, Karoline Leavitt, poised and confident in a state-of-the-art Washington. Studio Anderson didn't waste time. "President Traoré," he began. "Ms. Leavitt has argued that developed countries like the U.S. should lead global education reform. What's your response?" Ibrahim smiled politely. "With all due respect, Mr. Cooper," he said, "innovation doesn't carry a passport. Sometimes the best solutions are born from scarcity, not abundance. And sometimes leadership comes from places the world doesn't expect." Karoline leaned in, her tone sharp with sarcasm. "President Traoré, let us be serious. You're leading a country where, until recently, nearly half the population couldn't read. Meanwhile, we built Harvard, MIT, Stanford. How exactly do you see yourself teaching us about education?" There was a hush. Ibrahim didn't flinch. "That's exactly why we're here, Ms. Leavitt," he said calmly. "We faced real problems and we had to find real solutions. When you don't have luxury, you have to think smarter, not just spend more." Karoline smirked. "Smart. Mind me? Where did you go to school? Because if I had to guess, your education sounds more like it came from a battlefield than a classroom. It was a low blow." Even Anderson Cooper shifted in his seat. "That's uncalled for," he said quickly. "Uncomfortable." Karoline shot back. "I'm just being honest. We can't act like Burkina Faso's system is on the same level as ours." Ibrahim was quiet for a moment. Then he looked into the camera, not angry, not shaken, just steady. "Leavitt," he said softly, "thank you. You've just shown the world the very mindset that has held global education back." And he leaned forward, still calm, still composed. "Since you question my education, let me help you fill in a few blanks your team missed." A slideshow appeared on the screen beside him. "Bachelor's in Civil Engineering, First Class Kwame. Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana. Master's in Public Administration, Sorbonne, Paris, Full Merit Scholarship. MBA, London School of Economics, completed while serving as a military officer. Fluent in French, English, Arabic, Portuguese, and 4 local African languages." "How many languages do you speak, Ms. Leavitt?" he asked, still smiling. Karoline looked visibly uncomfortable. "That's not the point," she stammered. "You're right," Ibrahim replied gently. "The point is relevance." Then he dropped the hammer. "You proudly mentioned Harvard, MIT, and Stanford. You'll be pleased to know they're currently studying our education reforms. Harvard Business School is analyzing our rural learning model. MIT is adapting our low-cost engineering curriculum. Stanford just proposed a joint study on our digital literacy strategies in underserved areas. On screen, official documents appeared, letters of interest, academic reports, research agreements." Karoline blinked. "These numbers, they're inflated. They're verified," Ibrahim said plainly, "by UNESCO, by the World Bank, and even by your own Department of Education." The studio fell silent. Anderson Cooper leaned in. "President Traoré," he said with genuine curiosity, "can you explain what's so unique about your education model? Why is the world suddenly paying attention?" Ibrahim nodded. "I'd be honored." Then, in that deep, steady voice that had become a symbol of calm strength across Africa, he explained, "We start by teaching children to value knowledge, not just for jobs, but for dignity. We built schools where there were none. We trained women in remote villages to become educators using solar-powered tablets. We introduced community learning centers that double as libraries at night and training hubs by day. Most importantly, we listened. He paused. We asked students what they needed. We asked teachers what they lacked. We asked families what they feared. And we built something not based on imitation, but on understanding. Karoline looked stunned. And for the first time all evening, she had nothing to say. The camera cut back to Anderson, who sat back in his chair, visibly moved. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said slowly, "perhaps we just witnessed a shift in how we define leadership and education." The forum wasn't even over yet, but the world had already made up its mind. Africa had spoken. And this time, the world listened. Ibrahim Traoré leaned back slightly, his voice calm, deliberate, but now tinged with a quiet fire. "You seem to value American credentials above all else, Ms. Leavitt," he said. "So, you may be interested to know I currently serve as a visiting professor at 3 American universities." The camera caught the shift in Karoline's expression. Her face drained of color. That can't be true," she stuttered. But Ibrahim was already listing them, steady and unshaken. "University of California, Berkeley, I teach a course on innovative governance. Columbia University, I lecture on sustainable development. And at Georgetown, I lead seminars on youth leadership and civic responsibility." He smiled gently, like someone offering help to a student who hadn't done her homework. "I'd be happy to provide you with the contact details for the deans." The studio was silent. Even Anderson Cooper raised his eyebrows in admiration. "It's quite extraordinary, President Traoré," he said. But Ibrahim wasn't done. "What's even more extraordinary, Mr. Cooper," he continued, "is that those lecture halls, it's always full. American students are eager to learn how a small West African nation redesigned its education system on a budget smaller than the annual printer paper cost of a single state." Karoline's silence was suffocating. Still, she tried one. "Last time. But you still lead a poor country," she said sharply, like someone grasping at a broken rope. "How can you claim success in education?" For the first time all night, Ibrahim laughed softly, but unmistakably. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, "Burkina Faso may be financially limited, but our minds are not." Behind him, a screen lit up with international competition results. "Our students have won 47 medals in global math, science, and programming Olympiads just last year." Another slide. Teenage programmers showcasing award-winning apps, some acquired by American companies. Some of those apps, Ibrahim said, were developed by 16-year-olds from remote villages and sold for 7 figures. He paused. "Our college graduation rate, 94%. He looked directly into the camera. "What's the U.S. college graduation rate, Ms. Leavitt?" Karoline said nothing. Ibrahim answered for her. "Around 63%, depending on the state. Ours is 94%. And most of our students don't begin with stable electricity or internet." He let that sink in. "But more important than the numbers," he said, his voice deepening, "is what we teach." The screen behind him faded to black. "We teach that knowledge is not a luxury. It's a right. That intelligence has no skin color, no accent, no passport. That dignity starts with education, and that no child should ever feel inferior because they were born on the wrong continent." You could hear a pin drop. Karoline blinked, her earlier bravado now replaced with visible distress. I wasn't questioning African intelligence, she tried. "What exactly, Ms. Leavitt?" Ibrahim asked softly, interrupting her with grace. "Were you questioning my competence because I wasn't educated in Boston or New Haven? You assuming that your universities automatically make you superior?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. Anderson Cooper jumped in, trying to move the conversation forward. "President Traoré, it's clear you came very prepared for this discussion." Ibrahim shook his head. No preparation was necessary, he said. This is simply the reality of our daily work. Ms. Levitt assumed she could discredit a nation with outdated stereotypes. Unfortunately for her, we moved forward while the world wasn't looking. Karoline tried to pivot. Well, let's be realistic. The United States invests billions in education. That makes a difference. Ibrahim nodded thoughtfully. Yes, and yet your students still lag behind many smaller nations in math, science, and literacy. So maybe the issue isn't the money. Maybe it's the method. The screen behind him changed again. Global education rankings. Burkina Faso, up 47 places in 3 years. United States, down 12. And then came the quietest yet most devastating line of the night. These statistics, Ibrahim said, come from your own Department of Education. If quoting them sounds like distortion, perhaps the problem lies in your collection, not our performance. He turned back to Anderson Cooper. We don't have gold-plated schools, he said. But our teachers are paid fairly, live, decently, and can focus on students instead of juggling multiple jobs. Apparently, that's a revolutionary idea. Anderson turned to Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, would you like to respond? Specifically to the points about efficiency and educational outcomes. There was a long, awkward pause. Karoline opened her mouth and closed it again. Her eyes dropped to her notes. But nothing on that page could save her now. Finally, she murmured, we would need to look into those numbers. It's what's over. She came to discredit a young African leader. But he didn't fight with insults. He fought with truth. And he didn't just win the debate. He rewrote the narrative. The silence after Karoline's last words hung heavy in the air. We need to analyze this data more carefully, she said quietly, her voice trembling. Ibrahim Traoré nodded with grace. Of course, he replied gently. Careful analysis is always wise, especially before making public judgments. The tension in the CNN studio was so thick it seemed even the lights were holding their breath. Karoline shifted in her seat. Ibrahim waited, calm as ever, not as a man on the offensive, but as one who had already won by simply telling the truth. Sensing the need to ease the pressure, Anderson Cooper turned the conversation forward. President Traoré, he said. For educators around the world watching this, especially those working with limited resources, what advice would you give? Ibrahim looked directly into the camera, then slowly turned his gaze to Karoline. The first thing I would say, he began, is this. Never underestimate what innovation can grow out of scarcity. When you don't have much, you start thinking differently. He spoke plainly without bravado. Our teachers built entire science labs out of recycled plastic bottles. They turned old smartphones into digital textbooks. We taught coding using chalkboards before we had computers. These aren't compromises, they're innovations. And now, some of the wealthiest universities in the world are studying them. Karoline, still shaken, tried to re-enter the debate. But surely you agree, she said, voice unsure, that more resources usually lead to better education. Of course, Ibrahim replied. Resources help, but resources without vision are wasted. Vision without resources creates innovation. The ideal is both. If I have to choose, I'll always choose vision. Then he turned directly to her again. There's a strange thing we do globally, without even realizing it. We often decide who's smart based on where they went to school, not on what they've actually done. And that unspoken bias. It showed up loud and clear during a high-level education roundtable, when an American official casually asked President Ibrahim Traoré, "So, where did you go to school?" She didn't mean harm, but she wasn't ready for what came next. Ibrahim didn't flinch, smiled gently, and said, that question carries more weight than you might realize. It reflects a world that often values the name of a school more than the quality of a student's thinking. There was a pause in the room. Anderson Cooper, moderating the event, leaned forward. Are you saying prestige doesn't matter? Saying performance matters more, Ibrahim replied. Harvard didn't become respected because of its name. Its name became respected because of what its people produced. He looked around the room, then added, "If a tiny school in Burkina Faso turns out sharper engineers than Harvard, shouldn't we respect that too?" Silence. The American official, Karoline Leavitt, tried to defend her position, but reputation has value. History matters. Ibrahim nodded. Yes, history matters when it helps us grow. But when it's used to dismiss others, it becomes a cage. We don't teach our students to worship tradition. We teach them to question it, respectfully, bravely, creatively. You could feel the tension, but also the truth in his voice. Our students aren't just memorizing old theories, they're asking new questions. They're inventing tools we didn't expect. That's the heartbeat of real education. Millions of people watching from home understood. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a correction, a recalibration. Then, with a calm voice and almost no expression, Ibrahim said something. That turned the entire discussion upside down. "Ms. Levitt," he began softly, "you might find this interesting. Last month, I was invited to speak at a major international conference on innovation in low-resource education." She looked up, guarded. "It was organized by your own Department of Education," he continued. The secretary himself reached out, asking me to share what we've done in rural communities, especially in areas like literacy, acceleration, and hands-on science. The room went still. Even Anderson Cooper looked momentarily caught off guard. "I can share the official invitation with you, if you'd like," Ibrahim added, without sarcasm. Caroline's expression froze. "That seems unlikely," she muttered. But Ibrahim wasn't done. "MIT, Harvard, and Stanford have all contacted our office," he said. "They want to send research teams to Burkina Faso to observe, to learn from us." And then, without bragging, without bitterness, he said the one thing no one expected. "I'm not here to claim our system is better. I'm here to remind us all that learning doesn't belong to one continent, one class, or one color." He leaned forward slightly, his voice still steady. "The greatest teachers I know don't walk around with titles. They walk into villages and change lives with chalk and string. They don't need marble buildings to create genius. They just need a chance." There was no applause, no dramatic music, just stillness. And truth. Karoline tried to recover. "But that doesn't necessarily prove your model is superior." "It doesn't have to," Ibrahim said. "We're not competing, we're contributing. The world doesn't need a winner, it needs more curiosity." He ended with this: "If we keep defining education by how expensive the school is, or how Western the diploma sounds, we're not teaching, we're gatekeeping. That's not how progress works. Real progress listens. It learns. Even from those it once ignored." For the first time that evening, Karoline had nothing to say. She wasn't embarrassed, she was humbled. And that humility, as it turned out, became the most powerful moment of all. Not because Ibrahim Traoré won anything, but because he proved something deeper, that the real measure of an educated mind is its willingness to keep learning. There wasn't a standing ovation, no fireworks, no dramatic music, just silence. The kind of silence that falls when the truth lands in a room full of people who thought they had all the answers. President Ibrahim Traoré wasn't there to impress anyone at a global education summit surrounded by officials from powerful nations. He stood behind the microphone and did something rare. He told the truth gently but unmistakably. Real education, he said, isn't something you export in one direction. It's a conversation. And too often the world forgets that we, the so-called poor countries, have wisdom worth sharing. The room froze, not because his words were loud, but because they were undeniable. Anderson Cooper, moderating the session, tilted his head. "That's a powerful statement," he said. "But don't you think the Western model has proven results?" Traoré nodded. "It has strengths, yes, But results alone don't tell the full story. What about the systems that work quietly without the spotlight? What about the villages where we've doubled literacy in half the time? What about the students who build drones using scrap metal and solar panels? That's when Karoline Leavitt, a senior American education advisor, leaned in. You could see the hesitation in her posture, the unease of someone who'd arrived, expecting to lead the conversation only to realize she'd walked into a lesson. She cleared her throat. "Mr. President, need to say something. I came here thinking we had little to learn from you. I was wrong." The room turned toward her, stunned. "I assumed our system was superior because it had more money, more reputation, more everything. But I ignored the results you've achieved, the way your communities educate with so little, yet accomplish so much." Her voice trembled. "I'm embarrassed, but I needed to be." There was no smugness on Ibrahim's face, only empathy. "We all carry assumptions," he said. "The real test is whether we're willing to let them go." What happened next? No one saw coming. Karoline extended a formal offer on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education. "I'd like to invite you to share your model with our officials. We need to learn from you." And then, without fanfare, she proposed something deeper, a mutual exchange. Teachers from Burkina Faso would visit American schools. American educators would work in rural African classrooms. A real partnership. No hierarchy, no charity, just respect. President Traoré smiled, not with pride, but with relief. "That," he said, "is what global education should look like." 6 months later, Karoline was walking through a dusty village school in Burkina Faso. CNN followed her as she observed barefoot students writing code on refurbished tablets. She turned to the camera and said, "This place. It's changing how I define education." Soon, other countries followed. 23 governments requested visits. Universities sent researchers. Reports showed a 500% increase in global interest in Burkina Faso's education model. But for Ibrahim, it wasn't about numbers. One morning, his assistant handed him a folder. 847 formal invitations, she said, including one from Harvard. He nodded. This is what happens when people start listening, not just speaking. Karoline, once the skeptic, became a leading voice for educational humility. In a speech at Stanford, she said, "The most dangerous thing I ever believed was that intelligence had a zip code." A year later, she published a memoir titled Lessons from a Dusty Classroom. In it, she wrote, "To President Ibrahim Traoré, thank you for reminding me that learning isn't about power. It's about curiosity and courage and the willingness to be wrong." And in that quiet transformation, something beautiful unfolded, not a revolution in education, but a revelation that dignity can't be ranked, that ideas aren't exclusive, that the world's most valuable teacher might come from the least expected place.